And speaking of the Hall of Fame, this has been my favorite thing to talk about all week, and now I get to talk about it here on the Sound Off. Oh, happy day. First of all, WWE announced on Monday that the 2026 Hall of Fame ceremony is going to be held at Dolby Live at Park MGM in Las Vegas on Friday night, April 17th, with a 9 p.m. local start time, so that's midnight Eastern, shortly after SmackDown ends that night at the T-Mobile Arena. And broadcast details for the ceremony have not yet been revealed. Dolby Live is listed as having a capacity of around 5,200 seats. It is different from last year's venue. Last year's ceremony was held at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Stephanie McMahon, AJ Styles have already been announced, and the announcement came on Monday from The Undertaker, who FaceTimed with these two men to let them know that Axe and Smash, Demolition, is finally, at long last, taking their rightful place in the WWE Hall of Fame. This has been a long time coming, to say the least. They were my favorite tag team as a kid. I have been lobbying for this. I mean, if you listen to the Sound Off for any number of years, any length of time, you guys know it goes back at least 15 years I've been talking about this on the podcast. They were my favorite tag team as a kid. Just, I loved everything about them. The look, the music, the iconic Rick Derringer music. I know the knock on them was always, a bunch of Road Warrior ripoffs. Well, you know what? I didn't have any concept of that when I was first, watching them. And to me, they were to me what the Road Warriors were to, I'm sure, to a lot of other people who were watching them in Jim Crockett Promotions and wherever else that, they were watching Hawk and Animal. For me, it was Axe and Smash. Although clearly, both teams drew influence from the Mad Max movie. But Demolition was the shit to me. And I had the chance to interview them at WrestleCon as part of WrestleMania 33 weekend in Orlando a number of years ago. God, probably 8 years ago now. And it was a thrill to be able to chat with them. And of course, I asked them the same question I'm sure a lot of other people have asked them over the years, which is, hey, when are you going to go into the Hall of Fame? I'm sure no one is happier to go into the Hall of Fame than these two. Not even for the honor of being able to, get that kind of news and to be able to, get their flowers, and that's all very cool, but they'll be very happy to not have to answer any more fucking questions about, hey, when are you going into the Hall of Fame? How come you're not in the Hall of Fame? They're breathing a sigh of relief. They don't have to answer those questions anymore. But one of the biggest reasons I'm very, very happy and excited to see this is because so many other people who should have had the opportunity to, go and speak to the fans and to their peers and to have that speech never had the opportunity because Vince McMahon did not want them in the Hall of Fame for one reason or another, or he just, and maybe it wasn't even anything personal, but it was his decision to make ultimately at the time, and he just decided that this was not the year for this person to go in or that person to go in, and then they fucking died. And then they didn't have the chance, even when they were eventually inducted, to accept it and to cut a speech and to speak and be alive to get their flowers one last time. And I'll never forgive him for that when it comes to Randy Savage. The fact that the Macho Man went into the Hall of Fame and he was already gone, his brother had to accept on his behalf. What would a Macho Man Hall of Fame speech have looked like? Like we were deprived of ever knowing because of the bad blood there that Vince had, with him or for him for so many years. And it was inevitable that he was going to go into the fucking Hall of Fame, but he waited too long. Vader is another one. Vader literally knew that he was going to die. Like his doctor told him, you are on borrowed time. You have a bad heart. You have 2 years to live. I remember when he tweeted that because he was active on Twitter. I have 2 years to live. And in those 2 years, he would, often he would lobby and talk about how important it is for him to be in the Hall of Fame. They had him in to do the induction for Stan Hansen, and he was very entertaining. He was talking about the eyeball story where they had that match in Japan where his eye fucking popped out. And I think he had the wacky glasses, like he was cracking jokes and everything. And I'm like, man, I hope he has the chance one day when he goes in to be there for his own speech. And hopefully it's as entertaining as the one he's giving for Stan Hansen. But again, he knew he was on borrowed time. And then he died. They did not put him in the Hall of Fame until after he was already gone. And that could have very well happened with these two. So if for no other reason, I'm very happy that they are actually still alive and breathing and above ground and that they will be able to enjoy this. And they put out a new episode of their demo pod. They have their own podcast, by the way. And they thanked everybody who helped get them into the Hall of Fame. And Barry Darsow said this: we really do have to say, you brought up Kevin Nash. He's a great guy, and he's been pushing for us to get into the Hall of Fame for years. We have to thank him, Bret Hart. There's so many guys. Ric Flair called me up last year and said, congratulations, you're getting into the Hall of Fame. And I said, Rick, no, not yet. We're not there. And Flair said, oh, I thought you were going in. Yeah. Rick was, he had already downed a few, I guess, by that point in the morning when he made that phone call. So you have to excuse him. But they said that the Hardys and the Dudleys, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, the Warlord, the Barbarian, Typhoon, they're just some of the people that have reached out to them since news of the induction broke. Shout out, by the way, to Typhoon, Fred Ottman. He has been going through some rough health issues. Hopefully the worst of that is behind him now. His gallbladder exploded, basically, inside of his body, and it caused all sorts of complications. He was in the hospital for over 30 days. I think he's on the mend now. Hopefully he's doing well. Bill Eadie said, it's nice to be back in the frat house. We were in the fraternity for years, but we weren't allowed in the frat house for some reason. But now we're back in the house. And, you look back at the career of these two guys, and it was a lot more than just Demolition. But Demolition as a tag team, originally, Barry Darsow was not part of that tag team. It was Bill Eadie and Randy Cully in the role, who played Moondog Rex from the Moondogs tag team. And Darsow, he replaced him very quick. I want to say Cully portrayed Smash for maybe 3 matches. And then they made the switch to Barry Darsow. I guess because too many people recognized that it was Moondog Rex. They said, okay, we can't have him in this spot. So they switched. But they went on to hold the tag team titles 3 different times in the late 80s and early 90s. Their first run spanned 478 days. That was the longest for years and years and years, the longest in WWE history, until that record was broken by the New Day in 2016, 10 years ago, at 483 days. And then that record was later broken by the Usos at 622 days when they dropped the belts to Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn in the Night 1 main event at Wrestlemania 39. But you look at the tag teams, like a murderer's row of teams that these two guys had to work with back then. This was the pinnacle of tag team wrestling anyway back then. But the Hart Foundation, the Legion of Doom, the Brainbusters, the Rockers, Powers of Pain, Strike Force, the Bulldogs, Barry Darsow, I mentioned that these two guys are more than just Demolition. Barry Darsow, they may be going in as Demolition. But Darsow, he had a very successful run in Jim Crockett Promotions as Crusher Khrushchev. And every other character he portrayed for the remainder of his career was more just for comedy. He was Repo Man. Repo Man will always be a guilty pleasure of mine. I don't care what anybody says. The gimmick, the entrance music, the corny promos, and the vignettes. If you never saw the vignettes of him repossessing this kid's bike and someone's car out of their garage late at night. It was on one of the Coliseum videos. Repo Man, Blacktop Bully, the Hole-in-One Darsow, the Evil Golfer. Man's got to work, right? Money is money. It's a payday. It's got a family to feed. But nothing, you could say maybe Crusher Khrushchev, but nothing really ever hit the peak that Demolition did. And as far as Bill Eadie goes, he was the masked superstar for many years. And he worked with big names when they were on top as the champion, like Bob Backlund and Hulk Hogan. And so what ended up happening was, later on in the 90s, he sued them over the rights to the Demolition name. And that was a civil case that dragged out for many, many years. Ultimately, I think he did win the rights. It took a long time and a lot of bad blood, a lot of money. And then he and Darsow were later part of that class action concussion lawsuit against WWE. And that's likely what did them in for so long. But last year, they signed Legends contracts, and they were personally invited to attend the Hall of Fame ceremony last year by Triple H. So at that point, it seemed pretty clear the ice had thawed between them and the company, and that Vince McMahon leaving had a lot to do with that. If Vince McMahon is still in charge, Demolition ain't going into the Hall of Fame. That's just a fact. But I look back at Demolition. Do I have favorite matches and moments? You bet your ass I do. I mean, the double turn at Survivor Series 88, it came out of nowhere. But it's still a memorable moment, that big-ass Survivor Series elimination match, and in the middle of it, because Demolition were heels, Powers of Pain came in as babyfaces, right? And Mr. Fuji was managing Demolition, but they did a double turn. And that's probably the earliest memorable Demolition moment for me. The second oldest, most memorable Demolition moment for me was the 1989 Royal Rumble. And so the Rumble, this was only the second one they ever did as far as like a big event. And you have one member of Demolition come out to open the match. I don't remember who it was. Was it Axe who came out? I think it was Axe who came. No, maybe it was Smash. I don't remember now. But one of them came out at number 1, and then they hit the Demolition music again. And the other one came out at number 2, and it was like, holy shit. Like, this is fucking unbelievable. So that was a memorable moment. They were part of probably my favorite Survivor Series team ever in 89 with Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts. I mean, like, if you could sum up 80s WWE in one image, like, there it is, right? You got Hogan, Jake the Snake, Demolition, all on the same team. I mean, there it is. But they had some really good matches on Saturday night's main event against the Rockers and the Brainbusters. They won the tag team championships back. Probably the most memorable Demolition moment, my favorite Demolition moment, is WrestleMania 6. Right. And I don't want to say that was a great match, but they had a match with Andre Andre was basically at the bitter end of his in-ring career at that point. There wasn't much he could do, but it was him and Haku. They were the Colossal Connection. And so they had taken the titles off of them and put them on the Brainbusters. They left. I want to say Tully failed the drug test, whatever it was. Arn finished up. They weren't supposed to leave that soon, but they ended up leaving. They had to get the belts off of them. So the belts went back to Demolition just for them to lose them to the Colossal Connection, right? Since the Brainbusters weren't around anymore. They went from one Bobby Heenan team to another. It's like the fucking Don Callis family. There was no shortage of members back then. But that moment where they won the belts back and they three-peated at WrestleMania 6, like when they got the 3 count and you just see 68,000 people at the Sky Dome leap to their feet, this just great moment. And then after the match is when Bobby Heenan was putting his finger in Andre's face and he smacked him, paintbrushed him right across the face. And this was the Andre babyface turn. It's like, all right, Andre physically is done. So this is going to be his big heroic moment where we flip him back to babyface. A very, very memorable segment at that WrestleMania. But their best match that I ever saw Demolition have was later that year. At SummerSlam in 1990, they had a best 2 out of 3 falls match with the Hart Foundation, where the Hart Foundation won the belts back. To me, that's the best Demolition match. And Crush was in that match. So what had happened is that Axe, he was still there. They became a trio. And the reason they added Crush is because Axe had some health issues. He had an allergy to shellfish. He had an allergic reaction. He almost died. I think it had an effect on his heart. And so they needed somebody to step into his place until he was ready to come back. So that's why Demolition became a trio, and they added Bryan Adams. That was the birth of Crush with Demolition. And he is not listed as being a part of this induction. Obviously, he's dead, so he's not actually physically around anymore. But there's no mention of Crush. There's no mention of them going in as a trio. I'm okay with it because honestly, like his run as part of Demolition, while it is memorable and he did get to stand in as one half of the tag team champions, it was so short. And to me, it's like an early chunk of his career when he was very young. And he went on to have a singles run and another tag team run as part of a completely different team with Bryan Adams, or Brian Clark, rather, that I don't really see the need for Crush to be a part of a Demolition induction to me. I just, like, when I think of Demolition, I don't think of the trio in 1990. I think of Demolition as a tag team. And if Crush is ever going to go into the Hall of Fame, I think you could put him into the Hall of Fame separately one day. He had a pretty good run for himself as a singles in that company, both as a babyface and a heel. He doesn't need to be part of the induction here. Although I would imagine they would probably shout him out and mention him during their speech, unless there was bad blood there for some reason. I would imagine they would probably shout him out. But the thing I hate about what happened there at the end of their run is just the way that they were discarded by WWE. Once they got their hand, once Vince got his hands on the Road Warriors and he brought them in 1990, Demolition was like, okay, we don't need you anymore. And I know Axe was on his way out anyway. It wasn't the original team anymore. But to see how they were used at the end, we never got a proper feud with Demolition and LOD. It was so one-sided. Whenever they did wrestle, it was just LOD would kick their asses. And like their last WrestleMania match in 91, it was smash and crush against Tenryu and Katao from one of the Japanese promotions. I forgot which one. SWS maybe? I don't think it was All Japan. But whoever they were affiliated with, they bring in these two wrestlers from Japan. And Tenryu was, I mean, he was obviously a big name, but like the fans in WWE didn't know. They didn't know who these fucking guys were. And they're in there against Demolition and they're doing jobs. And I'm like, man, you talk about cutting their nuts off on the way out. It was sad. And they took their music away from them. They were coming out to some generic music now. It was awful. It was awful the way their run ended in that company. But Barry Darsow says they have been in conversations with WWE over who will be inducting them. And from my point of view, I could see WWE wanting a current team to induct them, maybe one of the teams who surpassed their record. So either the New Day or the Usos. But you got Warlord and Barbarian, man. They're still around. So are Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. And they're not affiliated with AEW anymore, right? The Brainbusters, they're right there. They're right there. They had some great battles with those two. And Darsow, I know, is very good friends with Arn. He's been on Arn's podcast before. I'm sure Arn Anderson would give one hell of a speech. So if I had a vote, I think the Brainbusters would be a fine choice. But those conversations are ongoing. But very, very happy that Demolition is finally taking their spot in the Hall of Fame. And now I guess we're going to wait to see when Rick Martel's going to go in. He deserves to be in there. I think, look, Ken Shamrock is going to be another name to keep an eye out for because I think Shamrock finally signed a Legends deal or a merchandising deal last year with them. That's what happened with Demolition. And now they're going into the Hall of Fame. So maybe Ken Shamrock gets added to the class this year.